okay? So this is the first thing that I am going to set up. It's just my spreadsheet in a way that is set up as my coding structure is set up. So the next thing I have to do is find a way to get all the information, all the codes from my data into the spreadsheet, okay? So that's what I need to do next. And there are a few different ways to do that. I'm just going to go over two ways that we can do that that are simple ways. So the first thing is you can just copy and paste codes into the spreadsheet. So what would that look like? So let's say I have this interview here, okay? And this interview is about the bike paths. So I have an interviewer who's interviewing a biker. And so the first question is, could you share your thoughts on the conditions of the bike path lanes that you use here in the city? And the biker says, sure, thanks for having me. Honestly, the conditions are quite poor. The bike lanes here are often obstructive or poorly maintained, which forces bikers like me onto the main roads alongside heavy traffic. It's not uncommon to find lanes blocked by parked cars or fading into nothing without warning. So this is the first response that they had to the question. So let's say I want to go through and start coding this based off my evaluation question, which is, it's to summarize, what do bikers think about the bike conditions in the city? And I see this first thing right here. That says, honestly, the conditions are quite poor. So this might be the first sentence that I want to code, okay? So if I just want to do a copy and paste method, I could just copy this sentence and paste it over here where it says exact phrase the code comes from, because that's the exact phrase that the code comes from, right? Honestly, the conditions are quite poor. And then based off that, I could fill in all the different columns based off this piece of text, which could be something like this. Honestly, the conditions are quite poor is the exact phrase that it comes from, right? My descriptive code could be poor. My provisional code, which is either condition, improvements, or safety, could be condition. This is from the first question, and this is biker one is my respondent, right? So this is kind of like the coding structure that I've set up. This is biker one in the first question, talking about the condition of bike paths, which they described as poor. And this is the full text that came from. Honestly, the conditions are quite poor, okay? So I could just copy and paste all that different information into the spreadsheet as I go through and code my data. The other method that I want to quickly show you is for those of you who are using Word, you can actually use the comment feature and leave comments on all of the different codes that you want to, all the different pieces of text that you want to code, and you can just leave comments, right? So for the first one I just did, honestly, the conditions are quite poor. I could just leave a comment on this, right? So you leave a comment by right-clicking on a piece of text and then selecting new comment, and you can just select it and leave a comment of all the different codes based off our coding structure, right? So it's the same thing that I just copied and pasted into our spreadsheet, which is biker one, first question. They're talking about the condition, which is poor, and then the full text of that statement. And I'm just separating each one by a semicolon. And so if I go through all my document and leave comments with all the different codes, then at the end, I can actually select all the different comments together by pushing Control-Shift-End on my keyboard, and then copying all those comments and pasting them into Word like this. And guys, I'm going to go through this really quickly, but there's a manual that will be shared with you after this, and you can always contact me, and I can give you a manual that goes through this step by step. So I'm going to do this very quickly, but just know that you can look at the manual afterwards if you want to actually do this process. But if you can then highlight all the different codes here, go to text to columns, delimited, separate each code by a semicolon, And then actually each code here gets separated into its own column. And all of these codes then can then be copied and pasted into your coding structure, right? So then you can just copy and paste all of this into the spreadsheet that you have with the different structures here. And then you have all your codes organized in a spreadsheet, which is very nice once you start doing the analysis process, okay? So once we have all of our codes in a spreadsheet, whether that's copying and pasting, just going through and copying and pasting the spreadsheet, or doing that kind of Microsoft Word method where we do comments and then select everything together, everything is in our spreadsheet. And now we have to start figure out how we want to analyze that data to identify and summarize themes of that data. And so we can analyze that data by using our spreadsheet. We can pivot, filter, sort, read through, add new columns. So if I have my Excel sheet here with all my codes, maybe I want to know what are people saying about the condition of the bike paths, right? So I can filter just for condition. And I can look, okay, I see poorly maintained, path obstructions. So I can already see, even through this small amount of data, that people are pretty negative and describing that the condition is pretty bad, okay? So I can already see a pattern starting to emerge when I'm looking at the condition, right? Or maybe I want to know what they say about safety. So I can just filter for safety. And I see inconsistent and unsafe infrastructure and unpredictable situations, right? So I already know that maybe the safety isn't that great either. So by filtering, by sorting, by just looking in through and reading through these codes, I can start to understand what kind of patterns are emerging and what it is that we can actually start saying about this data. And so when we analyze the data, we want to ask ourselves these questions. What kinds of things are people frequently saying, right? Are they frequently saying that the conditions of bike paths are poor? Are they frequently saying that they don't feel safe? What are they saying a lot of? Is there agreement amongst respondents on different topics? And where is there not agreement? Is there something like, are we seeing that older bikers feel that they are not safe while younger bikers feel that they are safe? Is there kind of a difference between the types of different respondents and the way that they say things? Are there certain types of respondents who are talking about certain things more frequently than others? Is there anything being said that is surprising or unexpected? Are there any hierarchies or causes and effects found between codes? Does it seem like there's a pattern of a beginning, middle, and end in how people are replying or forming kind of how they're talking about things? And how are words used differently and similarly amongst respondents to describe different topics? Again, are younger people talking about things differently than older people or something like that? Is there a way that we can see that how words are being used differently? And so as we look through our spreadsheet, we can ask ourselves these questions to start creating patterns and themes and narratives for our data. And so we have these different kind of levels, right? A code summarizes in a word to short phrase the basic topic of a passage of qualitative data, right? So that's what we were doing together when we saw, clouds over city buildings or sunny day at a lake. Those are codes, right? A category is a word or phrase that describes patterns in codes by lumping them together. So maybe, for example, we're seeing that a category is unsafe bike riders. So every time that we see someone describe using a code that talks about unsafe bike riding, that's kind of a category that we're creating, right? Unsafe bike codes. A theme is a phrase or a sentence that describes categories in a meaningful way. So a theme might be bikers feel unsafe when using bike paths in the city. That's a theme that we see emerging from the data. And a narrative puts those themes together or explain them in a coherent and structured way. So a narrative is when we can take that theme, that bikers feel unsafe using the bike paths, and start creating a narrative that's a few sentences that includes quotes and actual things that people said to, create a narrative of what's going on. So let's look at different ways that we can present that qualitative data and how we can actually show what our analysis is saying. So as I said, we can create narratives, right? So if we're talking about the teachers that we're talking about in terms of how their teaching experience, we can create a narrative like out of the 70 teachers interviewed, 32 were first-year teachers. First-year teachers reached out to school administration on higher rates than teachers not in their first year, as 75% of first-year teachers reached out compared to 32% of teachers not in their first year. So I could figure that out just by filtering who is a first-year teacher and who is not a first-year teacher, and what are the kind of coping mechanisms that they use, and is there differences between them, right? And start narratively explaining that. I also want to point out it's always good to incorporate exact quotes from the qualitative data into any kind of narrative that you create. So here I'm using, first-year teachers reported positive interactions with school administration, saying things such as, they really seem to care about my struggles and thought of ways that could help me. So we're actually incorporating quotes from the teachers into the narrative. We can use charts, right? So we can count up codes. We can say, how many different times, people are talking about unsafe bike paths, or we can talk about, what are the most frequent coping mechanisms that teachers use, and provide and quantify that and put it into a graph. So that's a way we could present the qualitative data. We could create process diagrams that just shows like what our theory is. So maybe we saw that teachers are frustrated with large class sizes, but that first-year teachers and veteran teachers handle that differently. So first-year teachers reached out to school administration for support, then received professional development, then learned valuable skills to cope with large class sizes, while veteran teachers reached out to colleagues for support, received advice, and then gained valuable skills to cope with large class sizes. So maybe we're trying to show a theory of what we think we're seeing in the qualitative data through a process diagram like this. We could use Venn diagrams, which is similar to the process diagram, where we're seeing overlap between different types of respondents in data and qualitative analysis and how they're talking about things differently. Or we could even do something very creative, like create a poem using the words from interviewees and create a poem that kind of describes how they feel about a certain thing. Like this could be a poem written with the words of veteran teachers about teacher troubles. So it could be like, dealing with large class sizes have been quite a challenge to provide individualized attention, a challenge to respond to all child's needs. School admin doesn't listen to us senior teachers. I persevere without support. So it's a way where we can creatively present that qualitative data in stuff like this, like through a poem. So that was a lot of information. Again, all this material will be available to you all, and there's supplemental material that I have as well that can be shared with you in terms of how to do qualitative data analysis, how to do coding, and all that kind of stuff, because this is a very quick and short session, but hopefully provide an overview of what can be done. So
thanks very much, Seth.
Sure.
Yes, your session on this very down-to-earth method always rocks. So we really appreciate all the very practical tools. I'd like to also proudly say that our company, Cognos, is already using your methods for this UNFPA's big research. So I would really witness that it's very practical, easy to use, and great tool, especially considering the cost of very high-tech softwares. So now maybe 3 questions, because we ran out of time, everything. So 3 questions, burning questions.
Good night.
Yes.
Okay, so it looks like a very, very, by the way, just to introduce, my background is not from monitoring and evaluation. So just looking from it, it's like a very time and labor intensive procedure. So I was wondering whether there are, like you mentioned about the softwares, tools, machine learning tools that somebody could use to save the time and labor. And are there any softwares that you would recommend which are not as costly, but also effective enough? And maybe also some recent trends on using AI more sophisticated software. So share this.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for the question. It's very important to talk about AI when we're talking about qualitative analysis, because as you mentioned, this is very labor intensive to read through data, code the data, analyze the data. It takes a long time, no matter what software you use. So if you use Microsoft Word, if you use one of the qualitative software programs, it's going to take time. But there are, so like I will mention like Atlas TI is a software program. So it's ATLAS dot TI. And actually, I'm just going to share screen one more time so you can look at it. So like Atlas TI right here and NVivo right here are kind of they're leaders in using AI tools to analyze data. And so those two software programs, they actually use ChatGPT. And so if you go into one of these programs, and Deduce actually does it too. A lot of them are doing it. You can say code my data. You can just click a button and it'll go through your data and code everything. Okay, so yeah, which is nice. And then you would just have to go through and verify that you agree with how it coded it, and you could modify it as needed. And so that's an option. And I have seen it actually, it's getting better, honestly, like every day it gets better. And so I think that it'll just continue to get better. And within a year or so, I'm sure that most people will be doing that, honestly. They'll just be asking AI to do that. ChatGPT or other AI like that, that's already being used where you can just upload a document into ChatGPT and say, analyze this.
Yes.
And give me the three main themes, right? And it'll give it to you. And so that's being done also. There's always concerns with that, right? With transparency and how it's coming up with those answers. I mean, I don't think I have to go into that, but yeah, that's a lot that's happening, and
Okay.
it gets better. It's always getting better.
Thank you very much. Insightful. Yes.
Sure.
Okay, any more questions? Maybe could you come in?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm Lei Pingguo from London University in China. We're mainly focused on evidence synthesis. At the coding, I want to ask how you summarize to start, like you said cope and talent. So just to domain, so will you make something else?
So say it one more time. So for code, say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I start you just mentioned two questions like we just code how to cope and how what the challenge, but just two questions or two domains, will you miss other information?
Good question. Yes, you could. I would say it all starts with the evaluation question. And so that's why I didn't want to talk too much about evaluation questions today, but they're very important. And so based off your evaluation question, you would come up with how many codes you think are necessary to answer that question, right? And you might have more than one evaluation question. Maybe you have 3 evaluation questions. And for each evaluation question, you have 3 different codes that you're looking for. And so your question is cope and challenge enough, or wouldn't you be missing information? The answer is very possibly yes. And so that was just an example, but you might have more codes that you're going to be using because you feel like you need more than 2 to be able to get all the information you need. So I would, yeah, absolutely. You want to base it off the evaluation question and use as many codes as you think is necessary to answer those questions.
Yes, so do you have any suggestions to how to set such items first?
So the example I used was provisional coding. And provisional coding is usually going to be based off of some sort of theory. And so the theory might come from a literature review. And so you might have a research question, and that research question, and then you do some research about it, right? And based off the research, you're coming up with your codes. So that's a very common way of doing it. It's kind of a research methodology where you're kind of based off research, you figure out what codes it is that you're going to use. There are other coding methods that I didn't go into today, but they have a preset amount of codes. So it'll be like 5 different codes, and you'll use those 5 different codes. And that'll just be applied to whatever kind of research, whatever evaluation question that you have. And so that's another way. I didn't talk about that too much today, but that's a different way of going about it. And that's another resource that I can share with all of you after this, which is a list of different ways to code. I just talked about 2 different ways today, which was descriptive coding and provisional coding, but there's dozens. And so I can share a resource that shows some more different ways that you can code. And some of those have like 5 different preset codes that you can use in different situations. But if you're not doing that, it would usually be based off research. What the research says should be the codes that you use.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you. Any last question before we break? Okay.
I just want to ask you that, when it comes to the amount of qualitative data we have, I think from your coding practice, I understood that it's more paying attention to what is being said the most when it comes to any answer of a question. But a lot of times I have struggled to find the insight from that qualitative data I have. And it happens, but it I guess depends on the quality of the data. But how do you recognize the less said, but deep insight from that data? Like, how do you recognize that? The way we interview people and what they say, like I sometimes struggle with, a lot of people saying the same thing. Still, I don't feel like that's the insight and or the really the thing that I need to convey to the project. How do you find that balance?
Yeah, that's a great question and comment, and I really appreciate you bringing that up because it's very important. So what I would say is that it's important to understand what people are frequently saying. I think it is important generally, right? Because that's just, with the bike paths example, like if everybody is saying they feel unsafe on the bike path, that's probably an important thing, right? They feel unsafe. But sometimes unpopular opinions or things that aren't frequently said are just as important. And it's up to you as the analyst to highlight those, right? And so I wouldn't say there's any easy way to do it other than if you think it's an important insight, then you should bring it up. And I want to just point to some of these questions. I'm just going to share one more time, because I do think that these can help guide it a little bit, because one of them is, what are people frequently saying? But we're also saying, is there anything that's surprising or unexpected? right? And unexpected can be something that not a lot of people are saying, but we think is actually a pretty valid point. And some of the other things are, is there certain types of respondents that are talking about things more frequently than others? Because we also don't want unpopular opinions to be drowned out by some sort of majority opinion also. So we should also disaggregate the data a little bit, right? If we have demographic data, gender or race or region or whatever it may be, then we can start disaggregating and seeing are certain types of people saying things in different ways. And that can also be an important way to kind of highlight things instead of just saying what is being said the most, like what are different types of people saying. That can also be an important way of doing it. Yeah, so I would say maybe start with what are people frequently saying, because that's just a good way to get a sense of your data, but don't stop there. Like keep trying to go more levels down. Like, are people saying things differently? What is something that is not being said a lot, but might be very interesting because it's kind of unpopular, right? So I would just say through that analysis process, that would come up. And what I'd also say is AI is not good at doing that, right? If you give your data to ChatGPT or some sort of AI and say, give me themes, all it's going to look for is what is most commonly said, what is most frequently said. And so it's not going to give you that information that you're talking about right now. That would require a human going through with a human lens and using your lens, right, about what actually is important and trying to highlight that. So, yeah. Do you think that answers your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you for the question. That's great.
Well, thanks very much, Seth. And another round of applause for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Very much. Yeah. See you next year.
Bye.